Okay, so heaven forbid that you are in a car crash that's actually caused by someone else's carelessness. Can you bring a claim against them? Well, the answer is really more complicated than you actually might think. And for most people, the answer to that question lies in a very important phrase called serious impairment of body function. Here to explain what that means for car crash victims is attorney Tom Sinas with Sinas Dramas Law Firm. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. You're welcome. And I appreciate you having me back.
All right. So let's go ahead and, if you wouldn't mind, helping us get oriented again by reminding us the basic concept of threshold injury.
Great place to start. We have talked about that concept before. What is a threshold injury and why is it important? Well, let's back up to where you started. Suppose you're the victim of a careless driver. Can you bring a claim against that careless driver for your quality of life type damages? Well, the answer is yes, but it depends. It depends on whether or not the victim has sustained what we call a threshold injury. Now, we don't have a specific set of body parts that are threshold injuries, but we have our three general concepts. There are three general categories of threshold injuries. The first is death. The second is permanent serious disfigurement. And the third, what you alluded to, is called serious impairment of body function. And the victim has to show that they have one of these three types of injuries in order to pursue a claim against the driver who caused the crash for their quality of life damages. That's the basic concept of a threshold injury. And it really is at the focal point of every case involving the victim of a careless driver.
All right, so let's go ahead and hone in on serious impairment of body function. What does that mean?
Okay, it's a great place to hone in because so many of these cases end up in this category. Obviously, there are the tragic few that result in death. There are probably less so that result in permanent serious disfigurement. That's kind of burning, scarring type cases. So most of them involve body injuries. And here, the third category is serious impairment of body function. What does it mean? Well, in general, it has three parts. And these are important for victims to understand because each of these three parts has to be established. The first of the three is what's called the objectively manifested component, meaning that it has to be observable or perceivable from actual symptoms or conditions by someone other than the injured person, meaning that the impairment that the injured person sustained has to be something that someone else other than just the victim can see. Now, oftentimes that's obvious, but sometimes it's not. For example, our courts have said if the victim has only experienced pain, as real as pain is to people, pain is not in and of itself generally perceivable by someone else. So that's the objectively manifested requirement. The second is that it has to be an impairment of an important body function, which means a body function that's of great value, significance, or consequence to the injured person, is what the law says. So it can't be unimportant. Now, this of the three is usually, no pun intended, probably the least important because people don't usually pursue a claim if they were injured to some part of their body that they didn't think was important, nor do most people, I think, have unimportant parts of their body. So that brings us to the third of these three requirements. And this is what's called the general ability prong. And it means as follows: the impairment has to affect the injured person's general ability to lead their normal life. And that is defined as having a few concepts. One, that it has to have an influence on the person's capacity to live their normal life. Second, it means that when we think about time, like how their impairments have been affected over time, time is relevant, says the law, but there's no strict time period that you look at. And third, this is a very fact-specific question, and it requires comparing the injured person's life before the crash versus their life after the crash. So the examination there is really important, not only in terms of the nature of the injuries, but how the injuries have affected the person's ability to lead their normal life. And only if they can show an influence, an effect on the ability to lead their normal life. Can the injured person get over that threshold? If they can't meet either of these three prongs that I mentioned, then even though they may be the victim of a careless driver who no one disputes is careless, if the injury doesn't cross that threshold, then the person can't pursue that claim for their quality of life. So it means that injured people have to not only understand this, but it means that the people that they're working with, whether it's lawyers, medical providers, friends, family, have to also understand these concepts because they're very unique to auto accidents in Michigan.
So I guess if you could generalize a little bit, how does this issue usually play out in those car crash cases then?
It really plays out in each individual case over time by understanding the person's life before the crash, the person's life after the crash, and a deep understanding of the type of injuries that they sustained.
All right. So if you would like to get more information about this, where can they turn?
They can find us online at www.sinusdramus.com. Shoot us an email at info@sinusdramus.com or give us a call at 616-301-3333.